It's no secret that in Warhammer 40,000, a lot of the focus of the canon lies on space marines, and with good reason. They're a very marketable thing, they're extremely important lore-wise, and the fact that they're very long-lived and very hard to kill means you can do a lot with them over several books, like Dante. So, as you might expect, standard humans tend to sort of fall to the wayside in Warhammer, which in my mind is a big shame, considering how interesting they can be, not just in spite of, but sometimes because of their fragility and shorter lifespans. So in this video, I want to cover some normal humans we want back in Warhammer 40,000. By the way, you may have noticed that over the past few uploads I haven't been putting memes at the start of my videos. That's because I've been applying to internships and jobs with my channel in the field of journalism, so I don't know if it's a good idea for a newspaper to see a SpongeBob meme at the start of my video when they're looking to hire me. Trust me, I miss the memes too, and they will come back as soon as it's too late for me to be fired. That being said, thank you so much for watching this video, and please consider subscribing if you enjoyed it. It really means a lot to me and really helps the channel grow. So without further ado, let's dive right into the video. And I'm going to be starting off with the low-hanging fruit here, so let me just knock out the easy ones first before we get into the really specific ones. And number one is Commissar Yarrick. Yeah, when I said low-hanging fruit, I was not kidding. Now, the big thing with Commissar Yarrick returning to the narrative is that it would be confirmation as to whether or not he is alive or dead. There is evidence that they may have walked back the death of Commissar Yarrick when they announced it a little while ago, stating that he may have been killed by Angron. So if they were to bring him back, it would either be to give him the proper send-off he deserves, finally seeing the hero of Armageddon off in his fight with who we presume is Angron, or we get confirmation that he is in fact alive. And this actually goes back to my previous video, that being Space Marines we want back. My first video was Traitor Marines, my second one was Loyalists, now this one is Humans. So I think it would be interesting to bring him back because in my previous video, I pitched an idea about a possible Hunt for Ghazghkull storyline. You see, we don't really see much of Ghazghkull after he gets beheaded by Ragnar Blackmane and gets his new body. So, seeing characters like Ragnar Blackmane, Grimaldus, Marshal Helbrecht, and yes, Commissar Yarrick effectively form an A-team to deal with Ghazghkull while the rest of the galaxy is concerned with Abaddon and Chaos would be an incredibly interesting storyline. Furthermore, I just think people need an Armageddon in Warhammer. Something that isn't the main storyline that's always as serious as a heart attack. You know, not the Cicatrix Maledictum, not the war with Abaddon, not the Black Crusade, none of that. Just its own side thing that isn't really life or death, but still has stakes, because everything right now has either been directly on Terra or dealing with the war with Abaddon, or, you know, the Era Indomitus. All in all, though, I just think it's really important that we get a resolution to Yarrick's story, knowing if he's alive or not, because he is such an old and iconic character that a lot of people are really attached to. I think the fandom just deserves to know what's going on with him, and yes, if he is dead, we deserve to see him off. Next up on the list is Amberley Vail, the Inquisitor who worked closely with Caiaphas Cain throughout his career, and after he died, organized his personal diaries and writings into cohesive reading for other Inquisitors to study and learn from. She was there throughout his entire career and was a consistent companion of his. And genuinely embarrassing confession here, I haven't read a Caiaphas Cain book yet, much less one with Amberley Vail, I am so sorry. But from what I've heard from people, they play off each other a lot, they flirt with each other a lot, they're just a lot of fun to read together. So that would mean, hey, she's already in books. Well, you see, the thing is, for these videos, these ones about characters we want back in the setting, I tend to avoid characters who have been in the setting for 5 years now. If you've been in a mainline novel within the past 5 years, that basically disqualifies you, because you're not really missing. However, I'm making an exception for Amberley Vail here because all her appearances are her playing second fiddle to Caiaphas Cain, and she excels in that role really, really well. She's apparently a really good straight man and lancer to his protagonist. However, since she does outlive Caiaphas Cain, I think it would be really interesting if she got a book all her own, where it's just her doing her own thing without him entirely. Or something from her perspective where she's the protagonist and Cain is her second. I think it could be interesting to switch up that dynamic, or just see how she functions on her own. It could be either her on a mission where Cain just isn't there, or her after Cain has died. Her maybe as an old woman, either directing things as a senior inquisitor from behind the scenes, or her as an old woman effectively having to go out on the front. And speaking of inquisitors, this is one that's very near and dear to my heart, and it is the Inquisitor Bronislaw Czevak. You see, Bronislaw Czevak was an Inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos who had a very interesting history with the Eldar, and it isn't really his connection to the Eldar that makes him interesting to me, it's how he manages it and what happens because of it. Now, I've mentioned him before on the channel, but he is the Inquisitor in the book Atlas Infernal by Rob Sanders, wherein he actually gets invited to watch a Harlequin dance by the Eldari because he has good relations with them, and eventually ends up visiting the Black Library and getting information from it. But after he gets tortured by Ahriman, the Eldari deem him to be effectively compromised and lock him in the Black Library where he starts aging in reverse. However, he is able to escape and steal the Atlas Infernal, which is a psi-blank book that was created by the Emperor as an ever-changing living map of the Webway, which was apparently made from the skin and veins of Sisters of Silence. From there, he uses this book and his wits to evade Ozek Ahriman and the Eldar as they all come looking for this book. And in the end, he's actually able to use it to wipe out an entire troop of Harlequins because the blank nature of it makes it absolutely lethal to Eldar. And even after this, in the book Atlas Infernal, we get a short story with him called Shadowplay, wherein he's captured by none other than Lilith Hesperax when she and her crew are on a jungle planet, and she is gonna torture him. So she basically straps him to a chair and presents her giant collection of poison knives and daggers to him to start intimidating him. However, he is so knowledgeable in poisons and other torture devices that he can identify the exact concoction on each dagger by smell alone, and very firmly assures her that he has drunk the antidote already to every single one, causing her to effectively have an emotional breakdown because her prized collection of knives is useless before this one goddamn guy. A breakdown which is then interrupted when one of her underlings bursts in and says, "Hey, there's something out here on this planet. There's some, like, invisible monster that's killing us off one by one. We gotta go. We need to do something. We need your help." But Lilith basically tells her to shut up because she's having a moment. However, this witch is so frantic that she accidentally scratches Lilith with one of her very poisonous knives. So if only there was a way she could get the antidote to that poison. Camera pans to the side, to the guy strapped to a chair with a giant grin on his face. So a simple deal is struck. Bronislaw Czevak tells her how and where to get the antidote, and she lets him go. She cuts him loose and then immediately runs off because she has to go now, leaving Czevak free to go back through the Webway portal he came out of, while simultaneously giving the finger to the Acolyte of Ahriman who he was imprisoned with on this planet. Hence why I, in fact, want him back in the setting. Now, a little aside here, he comes from a book by Rob Sanders. However, Rob Sanders, as far as I can tell, is no longer with Black Library. It really does seem like the last thing he wrote for Black Library was the book Sons of the Hydra, which came out in 2018, and since then we've had effective radio silence from Sanders. And I think that's a shame because, in my mind, I don't think any other authors could really capture the sense of wonder and sort of aura of exploration that Rob Sanders could put forward in his books. The characters he would write and the scenarios he would put them in, oftentimes adventures that would take them across long tracts of the galaxy, made the whole galaxy feel very lived in. It felt like there were places that weren't entirely explored, while in other books it can feel like the entire galaxy is one giant hive city that sucks, or one giant barren desolate battlefield with very little to it. He really helped show that this is a galaxy that is very old and very lived in. Some other authors do this, like Darius Hinks in the Blackstone Fortress books, and Rob Rath in The Infinite and the Divine, but Rob Sanders was able to do it very consistently, and honestly, a lot of his characters I miss and want back in the setting. In fact, I actually mentioned his Loyalist Alpha Legion characters called the Redacted, led by Occam the Untrue, as ones that I want back in the setting as well in a previous video. And a bit of a spoiler, one character that I want back who is a Xenos who will be featured in the next video to this one, Xenos characters we want back, is also a Rob Sanders character, that being the Eldari outcast ranger Una Belphoebe. Now, I won't give away too much about why I want her back so much, but I will state that she actually interacts directly with Bronislaw Czevak. In fact, they seem to have a long history of working together under their belt when they meet up in the Eye of Terror. Yeah, they do meet up in the Eye of Terror on a demon world. Again, this is all just to add to my point that Bronislaw Czevak has that really cool sense of adventure about him that I would love to see back in 40k. So let's shift gears here away from modern characters and get back to a few Heresy-era ones who people want to see back in the setting, mainly because what was going on with them was entirely unresolved. First up on the list is a character named Kasper Ansbach Hawser, also known as Ahmad ibn Rusta. Now, Kasper Hawser was actually a member of the Terran bureaucracy who founded something called the Conservatory. He did this in the later stages of the Great Crusade. However, he would eventually seek to work in the field after becoming disillusioned with working alongside Terran bureaucracy. So, he would want to travel to Fenris to get over his fear of wolves and sort of see the frontier, so to speak. However, his lander would be shot down by some native Fenrisians, but his life would be saved after he, severely injured, was rescued and protected by a Fenrisian he named Bear. However, Bear was actually Bjorn. He was just mispronouncing his name. And this Bjorn would go on to become a space marine when they would be both found by the Legion. He is Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the oldest living space marine in the galaxy. Cutting a long story short, Kasper Hawser becomes a Skald of Tra, that being a Skald of the 4th Company, and becomes a very valued member of the Legion for his role in keeping their memory alive after one of them has died by relaying their stories. However, it becomes revealed that he was an agent of both the Thousand Sons and had seemingly come into contact with the Cognitae, all of this unwittingly, however. So, he would actually help them when they invaded Prospero and burned it to the ground. However, after that, he would voluntarily go into hibernation underneath Fenris, saying goodbye to his friend Leman Russ one last time. So yeah, he is also a friend of Leman Russ, and he goes down there knowing that he's gonna stay down there dreaming alongside the other dreadnoughts of the Legion, because they do all sort of share a collective dream and have dreamt, quote, every dream that can be dreamt. But they do kind of share a sort of unconscious headspace together where they can commune with one another. So that would mean Kasper Hawser and Bjorn the Fell-Handed are still in communication in some way. So given all the speculation about the return of Leman Russ and what has become of him, especially given Magnus's line that one time he came to Fenris where he said, "Well, brother, let's not talk about where you are right now," it would be very interesting to hear from Kasper Hawser, either a revived version of him, now walking the earth once again, or him still in this sleeping dream state that was hinted at in the book Prospero Burns, because oddly enough, that's the only book he shows up in. Another Horus Heresy era character many of us want to see come back is Kelbor Hal, the first leader of the Dark Mechanicum. You see, Kelbor Hal would become the Fabricator General of Mars around the very late end of the Great Crusade, and he was actually of a faction that never viewed the Emperor as the Omnissiah, instead seeing him as a liar and a usurper, using the Mechanicus' religion to control them, and he believed that the autonomy Mars enjoyed, because you have to remember, the Martian Empire was basically a separate empire from the Terran Empire, just with the same figurehead. They were known as the Twin Empires, would be steadily eroded and the Mechanicus would be brought to heel. He also chafed against the tight restrictions that the Emperor imposed on anything that could be touched by chaos, or anything that was in the Noctis Labyrinth on Mars, all those things. So it was quite easy for Horus Lupercal to actually get him on side. As such, he would lead the forces of the Dark Mechanicum from Mars all the way through to the Siege of Terra, where afterward he would lose, and we can only presume that he fled into the Eye of Terror, because the last we hear of him is that he starts screaming while hooked up to the machines of his ship when he realizes that time is completely broken, and we don't hear a peep about him after that. So, since we didn't see him die, it can only be assumed that he fled to the Eye of Terror and kept leading the Dark Mechanicum from there. Now, while you will see heretics here and there in Warhammer, the original Dark Mechanicum themselves, that being the ones that fled into the Eye of Terror after the Horus Heresy, are very seldom seen, despite the fact that we see their handiwork all across the galaxy. Remember, they have a large hand in the creation of things like demon engines and the fleets that the Despoiler uses for his Black Crusades. They are integral to the Traitor War effort. So, it would be nice to see who's leading them now, because I do believe it would be Kelbor Hal, unless we see him get off to later on. This is of course coupled with the rise of the character Vashtor, who we heard about all through the Arcs of Omen, and who is really important there. You have to remember, he's a god of technology and innovation, he's hooked up to the Soul Forges and the Iron Warriors, a lot of things going on with him, and he slots in really well to the Dark Mechanicum. So seeing Vashtor either clash with Kelbor Hal or form an accord with him would be really cool, and I think it's something we should see. Next is Moriana The Crone, that being the advisor to Abaddon. Now the reason we want to see more of Moriana is because we're not entirely sure who she is. We know that she used to be a founding member of the Inquisition, who eventually left to join up with Abaddon and start advising him after she lost faith in the Imperium. In fact, it was through her that the traitor legions after the Horus Heresy would learn of what became of the Imperium, the fact that it is now a theocracy that worships the corpse emperor, and that about 1,000 years had passed since their exile after their defeat at Terra. That happened in the Black Legion books, which cover the formation of the Black Legion, so we know she's actually been alive for all these thousands of years thereafter. We know this because after the Great Rift opened, none other than Inquisitor Greyfax and some Grey Knights would go to visit her in order to try and get information out of her. It's a long story and it's very complicated, and it's covered in an audio drama called The Eye of Night, which I find to be very, very good. Furthermore, she isn't exclusive to Abaddon. She also has dealings with characters like Hounsou, who I'm a big fan of and, again, desperately want to come back to the setting. Hounsou actually gets told that Moriana is the advisor to Abaddon, and he scoffs, saying, wow, shows how great her advice is. Which, honestly, fair enough. They were already 13 Black Crusades deep at that point, and Cadia hadn't been broken yet. However, the real mystery about her comes from her true identity, because come the end of the Siege of Terra, there are two characters named Moriana. One is Ekaterina Moriana, that being a fusion of Cyrene, the Blessed Lady of the Wordbearers who became reborn as a woman named Octe who was a perpetual, and Katerina, that being the Psyker who was with Olanius Persson when he made his way to Terra. Now, if you don't have context for that, I'm sorry, I am not capable of explaining it to you in a succinct manner. The other person she might be is Moriana Muhausen, who was one of the chosen of Malkador, selected by him in his final hours of life to carry out his will. These people would eventually go on to become the founders of the Inquisition. So, since Katerina Moriana is so mysterious and Moriana Muhausen is directly connected to Malkador and the birth of the Inquisition, seeing either one of them be the Moriana we know now as a member of the Black Legion, effectively, would be really cool, and I want to see how that played out. Now, stepping away from the Horus Heresy characters here, let's get to some ones from the more contemporary setting. First up is Andrej the Guardsman. And by the way, I did check, that is apparently how the name is pronounced in Serbian, Slovak, Slovene, and Croat. I just wanted to clarify that because I've heard some people say things like Andrej or Andrej. I think that could be some people are confused where the name originates from, but I did check and it is Northern Balkan. So Andrej, as many of you will know, was the guardsman who befriended Merrick Grimaldus on the planet of Armageddon back when they were defending the city of Hellsreach from an Orcish invasion. It is the topic of the book Hellsreach by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, and it is one of the most famous books in all of Warhammer, and as such, Andrej is very well known. Now, what makes him so interesting is that he is a very lighthearted person, literally joking and exchanging jabs with Grimaldus, who is, you know, too much of a space marine to properly respond, even though he wishes he could. However, it's not his jocular-friendly nature that people know him for. In fact, they know him for when it broke, because throughout the book when we see him, only little bits here and there, he is often either directly with or talking about a certain woman, who happens to be a fellow guardsman. He actually tells Grimaldus in the middle of fighting that he's gonna go and look for her because he intends to marry her if they both survive this. And when they meet up at the end, after a literal temple had collapsed upon them and they had to tunnel their way out, Grimaldus asks him at the very end of the book, "Your friend, your love, did you find her?" And Andrej immediately stops joking and laughing with him and gets this crestfallen, sad look on his face where he says, "Yes, I did," making it clear that he did find her, just not alive. It's one thing for intense or inherently grim characters to show negative emotions or feel pain. We see it all the time in Warhammer. However, when the funny, happy guy looks crestfallen and really breaks, that's when things get hard. If he was just any guardsman, some rough-and-tumble veteran who was in a similar position, it would be sad, but it just wouldn't hit the same. And that's why I think a lot of people would like Andrej back, especially if we get back characters like Grimaldus or Commissar Yarrick. Just the whole cast and crew from the Armageddon Wars. Well, anyone who's still alive, of course. Because he brings that sense of levity, but also that sense of tragedy. That sort of emotional long way down that other characters wouldn't really bring. However, I will say I'm a little iffy on this one because, while I believe recurring characters are the heart and soul of a lot of franchises, sometimes it's better to leave well enough alone instead of just taking someone whose story was start to finish perfect, wrapped up nicely, and then just beating it to death for no reason. It should be pretty apparent at this point that these videos are a combination of characters that the general public wants back, but also ones that I want back that I think people would agree with me on. But this one is one I'm iffy on because even though I know a lot of people would like to see him again and follow up with him, see where his career is going, see how he's coped with the loss of his loved one, see how things are doing just on Hellsreach from a man on the ground who is known to the people, I'm the kind of person who is very much hesitant to just beat a dead horse, he says while on his third installment of a video series. Next up is a really fun one, and one that I think is unique to this list. That is Duke Severus. Now, Duke Severus is a character I've mentioned on this channel several times because he's just so unique. Duke Severus XIII was the governor of the Calixis sector and wanted control over some planets on the periphery nearby him. His reasons for wanting this were entirely selfish, because he wanted his family to have more prestige and felt that they should have their own little interstellar empire, because it had been denied to his predecessors, who actually used to be rogue traders who got their warrant of trade revoked. Because of all this, denying what he feels is his due, and his family's failing fortunes, he is very bitter against the Imperium, and as such turned to the Drukhari in order for them to help him gain control of the periphery. And this would actually work to a degree until the sector was invaded by orcs, at which point the Drukhari would effectively break with him. But he would claim ownership of the periphery around the Calixis sector and declare himself to be a seceded empire, the Severan Dominate, which comprised about 11 or more planets, which is actually nothing to scoff at. As you can imagine, the Imperium was a little testy about this. However, the subjects of the Severan Dominate have done a pretty good job of resisting the Imperium. This is because Severus has spent no small amount of time promoting the belief amongst his people that he is actually the true representative of the Emperor's will, and that the Imperium are the real traitors, so there is a level of zeal to them that has kept them going in the fight for quite a while. Also the fact that they know the home terrain, and their supply lines are relatively short. Furthermore, they do still have ties to the Drukhari, who have actually been scooping up Imperial Guardsmen left, right, and center, and civilians in the Severan Dominate who have effectively been sold out. Now, when I say I want Duke Severus XIII back in Warhammer, what I'm really saying is I want the whole Severan Dominate storyline brought to the front, because it's never actually been in a novel. It's from the Only War campaign books, which was an old TTRPG. So again, this is a very old piece of lore. We would get large battles covering campaigns, naval engagements, logistics, characters discussing this, the various guard regiments that could be brought in, including the Centillion Fusiliers, who are one that a lot of people know about. We would get to see things from the side of the secessionists for a change, which would be incredibly interesting in how they feel, or ones that are having doubts, or ones that are all in on the cause. We would get to hear from Severus himself, see the man behind the legend, and we would also get some cool Drukhari action, which I think would be awesome. Next up is a character who's more so known for the memes than he is his actual storytelling, and that is Fidus Kryptman. Yeah, the Inquisitor Kryptman, who scorched to several planets in order to stop the Tyranid advance, which would result in his being declared a traitor and being sentenced to death should he ever be apprehended. However, it should be noted, this strategy did in fact work and slowed High Fleet Leviathan's progress to a crawl. Now, despite the meme of him being wacky guy who burns planets left, right, and center for the meme, it should be known that he's not just an old Warhammer character, he is one of the oldest named characters. In fact, Inquisitor Fidus Kryptman was first introduced in White Dwarf back in 1990. And the last time he appeared in a piece of work was a Rob Sanders short story, love Rob Sanders, titled Fearful Symmetries, released in 2017. And furthermore, he's actually the one who discovered the Tyranids properly. You see, he came upon the dead world of Tyran, where he effectively uncovered black box information that detailed the alien species which had come to the planet and wiped it out so quickly, which he named Tyranids. He would then go on to present this information to Marneus Calgar and Uriel Ventris along with the other Ultramarines, and would warn them of the threat, allowing them to fortify various systems. But this is where things would start getting dicey for him, because that's when he would propose using Exterminatus on various planets in order to stop the Tyranid advance. And the Ultramarines were obviously very against this. However, he would lie to Uriel Ventris, and with the help of the Mortificators, perform Exterminatus anyway. From here, he would go on to establish the quote-unquote Galactic Cordon, which is what he is most famous for. You know, scorching a ton of planets in front of the Tyranids in order to slow their advance. And again, it did work, but got him in a lot of trouble. And yet, despite that, even Dante acknowledges his worth, stating that, are we really gonna have to use the Kryptman strategy while fighting the Tyranids that were on their way to the Ball system? For a character whose name is literally known to people like Lord Commander Dante, and who has history, bad history mind you, with Marneus Calgar and Uriel Ventris, and who would likely be known to Guilliman at this point, it's really shocking that his only mainline novel appearance was Warriors of Ultramar back in 2003, and it should also be noted that various Space Marines, despite his status, did side with him, like the Mortificators and even the Death Watch. So even though he effectively has a kill-on-sight order on his name, the Death Watch still work with him. And you have to remember, all of this went down in M41-999. He was involved in all 3 Tyrannic Wars, and now that the 4th one is underway, and he's still alive, I think it would be really interesting for him to make his reappearance in the galaxy. Maybe he and Gilliman have to have a sit down and talk it out. I think that would be really interesting. Now, before I get into the number 1 pick, I want to put out an honorable mention, and that would have to be Guardsman Julius Hawke. Now, even though he is not really relevant to the wider story, and not even that well known, I think he should be, because he's an incredibly cool and interesting character. You see, in the book Storm of Iron, the planet of Hydrocordatus, which was besieged by the Iron Warriors and saw the ascension of Hansu to the rank of Warsmith, would have its fortress and all its troops leveled to the ground. However, one person would survive, the Guardsman Julius Hawke. You see, Hawke was a troublemaker and sort of a problematic kind of case, so his superiors obviously didn't think much of him. However, when he would be the only survivor of one of the outer posts of the fortress falling, he would effectively go behind enemy lines, establishing communications with his superiors and surviving in secret, right under the noses of the Iron Warriors and their massive hosts of traitor soldiers, gathering information on where they were rallying, checking their siege engine capabilities, keeping tabs on where their titans were gonna be, and giving such valuable information to the defenders of Hydrocordatus that it allowed them to survive for way longer than they would have, and made it a much more difficult affair for the Iron Warriors. It was to the point where the Iron Warrior leaders, Hansu, Forex, and others, literally had to stop and think, wait a minute, is someone out there? Is someone keeping tabs on us? There's no way they could be causing this much damage to us and defending against us this well otherwise, and they personally had to send people to look for him. However, when one of their guys finally finds him, an Iron Warrior in Terminator armor, he's getting ready to enact a plan that was concocted by his superiors on the other end of the Vox in the fortress, which would see him launch a surface-to-orbit torpedo at the Iron Warrior's trenches, and he manages to set the thing off and kill the Iron Warrior himself. It's all executed very well, and it never feels contrived or cheap or any of it. If you read Storm of Iron, you're absolutely gonna fall in love with the character. He's incredibly fun and interesting, and once again, he survives this whole affair. Also, he does appear in books after this, because after he was taken by the Imperial Fists who arrived on the planet, he eventually ended up, as far as I know, in the custody of the Mechanicus, and was working for them. He's actually apparently a recurring character in the Forges of Mars series, which is 3 books long, and is also by Graham McNeill, who also wrote Storm of Iron. Now, I should note, I haven't read the Forges of Mars books, so I don't know how his story ends off or if he dies, and I don't know how he is in the new books, but if he's anything like his previous depiction, I think it would be cool to see him come back, just because I really liked him as a character in a book that I also really liked. And now, number 1 on the list is Admiral Spire. Now, he's a weird one because he has never appeared in a book, and in fact, he is actually from the game Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2, which was really good. You see, he was actually a hero of the Gothic War, which I've actually become very interested in and would like to make a video on at some point. You see, the 2 Gothic War books, Execution Hour and Shadowpoint, really made me fall in love with the Imperial Navy as they're presented in books, which I don't think we really get enough of. So Admiral Spire would serve as a really great vehicle for getting more Imperial Navy stories, and would also see a way to introduce the Eldari back into the setting properly, because he has good relations with them, specifically a Corsair prince named Eldrathane Voidstinger. If you've watched some of my shorts, you would know that the Imperial Navy and the Eldari worked side by side and fought shoulder to shoulder, and actually had really good relations during the Gothic War, coming to respect each other a lot, especially in the face of their mutual enemy. It's funny, the Imperial Navy actually has the best relations with the Eldar out of any of the branches of the Inquisition aside from the Grey Knights and maybe the Inquisition. We also just need more heroes of the Imperium who aren't Space Marines or Commissar Yarrick, because it can often feel like those are our only 2 options here. Spire was a really cool character if you've seen the full campaign for that game. So, seeing him put to novelization, seeing what he did in the Gothic War, maybe seeing him meet up with those Eldar that he made friends with, like Eldrathane Voidstinger, and even Yvraine, yes, he did meet up with her in the game and they had rocky relations kind of, would be really, really cool. I think a human character like him would bring a lot to the setting, someone who can build bridges and smooth over relations, but is still wary of the people he's around, because, again, these are alliances of convenience. Guilliman has made some inroads in working with the Eldar, but I think a man on the ground like Spire would be a lot more interesting, because again, it can't just all be Primarchs. There's also the fact that Yvraine nearly double-crossed him, which made him pretty damn testy. It doesn't make things too rosy where the Imperium and the Eldar can just stand around holding hands. Furthermore, I just really liked his dialogue in the games, where he would talk to people not down to them, but as though they were equals, but he still had this air of authority. Again, he had that cool personality that allowed him to smooth over any rough edges people were having with each other and bring people into line. He could bounce with the best of them, and I think we need more of that in human characters. People who are not intimidated or terrified of Space Marines, but can look them eye to eye and say, hey, I respect you, but you need to listen to me. But what do you guys think? Do you guys agree with me that these characters would do a lot for the setting if they were brought back in? Are there any I didn't mention in this video who you desperately want to see come back? Maybe some badass guardsman in a book I haven't read, or a cool member of the Sororitas from a book that, again, I haven't read, because unfortunately I have not read much Sororitas stuff. Or do you feel like instead of bringing up characters from the past, it would be better to look forward and look into new characters and tell new stories? After all, Morvenn Vahl is going to be getting her own book soon, Spear of Faith, and I think that's one to definitely look out for. As always, I would love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below. Please subscribe if you have not already done so, and until then, I will see you in the next video.